When you play the Game of Thrones,
Subscribe and like.
or you die. There is no middle ground.
Welcome back to the Grease Goblins YouTube channel. Today's video, we're going to be talking about the best chapter from every single POV character that I want to preference has a minimum of 5 chapters. I didn't want this to just be, oh, well, if this character has 1 chapter, well, obviously it's their best chapter. I only want to talk about characters' best chapters that have at least a bare minimum of chapters of 5 so that we can go through and look at them and go, okay, this is their best. I do also want to say I'm not including the Winds of Winter sample chapters, even though I think a lot of those are great. They could always be changed by George, and so those aren't necessarily official. So I did want to point that out before we did get into the video. Also, my cat is currently trying to sit on my lap, so if you see her during this video, say hello. Her name is Rhea, but yeah. So let's start with, I think, the hardest one of any one of these characters that I did, Tyrion. For a lot of people, Tyrion is their favorite point of view character, and for me, I had a really tough time because I think there's a number of chapters that you could look at with Tyrion for being their best. The first one, I think, could be a number of chapters during the Battle of Blackwater for Tyrion, or even some of his Clash of Kings and his best chapters in that book. His sequence with Cersei, when Cersei believes that she's captured the lover of Tyrion. That's a great chapter. There's a lot of great chapters for Tyrion in A Clash of Kings. But personally, to me, I think Tyrion, his best chapter really is in A Storm of Swords, just based upon how many great payoffs and reveals that happen in there. You've got the trial stuff, you've got the Mountain and Oberyn's fight, you've got the final chapter of A Storm of Swords with Tyrion killing Tywin, the Tysha reveal, him killing Shae. So for me personally, I did go with Tyrion 10 A Storm of Swords, and I just think that Tyrion 10 is so perfect because it gets the payoff of the trial sequence. So Tyrion wakes up and he's figuring out what he's going to do with this trial, because very differently than in the show, in the book, Tyrion goes into the final day of his trial already having that idea that he could do a trial by combat with Oberyn being his champion. And so it builds all that tension really well until it gets to the point where Shae testifies. You have this great moment in the series where Tyrion is basically lashing out. It's really adapted well in the TV show. And then it doesn't even stop there. This chapter keeps going and it goes to the actual fight, the trial by combat between Oberyn and the Mountain, and then Oberyn's death. So I think that is Tyrion's best chapter for me personally. I have no arguments with anybody saying the Tysha reveal, his last chapter of A Storm of Swords, should be his best, because it's just an insane payoff to everything the first 3 books have, established. And so I'd love to hear your favorite chapter for Tyrion, but mine personally, Tyrion 10 A Storm of Swords. Next, we have Jon. Now, Jon's another hard one because you could say a number of chapters for Jon in A Dance with Dragons. You could say a couple different chapters in A Storm of Swords. You can even go some chapters in A Game of Thrones. I think Jon 7, where we see the battle for Castle Black with the Thenns attacking alongside the party that Ygritte is in, Jon having the payoff to his journey so far in this battle for Castle Black, and seeing how Janelle Noe goes about defending the wall, and even coming to the very end of the chapter where Ygritte dies in Jon's arms is always heartbreaking. To me, it's my favorite chapter for Jon. It has just enough great character work for Jon, and then also has this climactic moment of the Battle of the Wall, which is to me the most climactic part for the Battle of the Wall, just based upon it very easily could have gone the other way, and the Wildlings could have won, and Jon could have died. So to me, that is my favorite chapter for Jon throughout the 5 books. Getting to Arya. Arya is a very tough character because she has some fantastic chapters sprinkled throughout pretty much every book that she's in. But for me personally, I know that Arya 5, A Game of Thrones, is not necessarily like an Arya straight up point of view, great for her character. It's more of a look into Ned's death, and really it's just who's going to get the POV. Is it going to be through Ned's point of view, Sansa's, or Arya's? But Arya gets the finale of the King's Landing plot line with Ned. And so to me, I think it had to be my favorite just because Ned is such an important character in book 1. He is the main character. It's this moment in which we see that the normal trajectory of a story where the hero always wins or the good guys win, and we see Ned's death. It's just a heartbreaking moment, when you've been with the character of Ned for so long. And I think that not only is that a really great moment for the series, I think a lot of things that get overlooked with Arya 5 is a lot of the payoff of seeing Arya having to survive, and she's being driven to steal, and she's really desperate, but she's also, very clever in the way that she's able to see through the Lannister trap of dressing up two men to be Northmen, like they're taking her home, but Arya sees right through that. I think that Arya 5 in A Game of Thrones does a great job of concluding both Arya's arc and Ned's arc perfectly in book 1, and also you have a really big cliffhanger as Yoren has more or less taken Arya, and you don't know if Yoren is going to kill Arya or what he's doing, because Yoren has a knife to her, and you don't know what's actually going to happen. You don't really find out until the next book, because the show and book are very different in the way they end the first season / book. But to me, I think it's my favorite Arya chapter. I think you could look at Arya's second A Dance with Dragons chapter. I think you could look at a number of her chapters in A Storm of Swords as being her best chapter. Even I think her last chapter in A Clash of Kings, her escape from Harrenhal, is a fantastic chapter. There's a number of chapters you could go with Arya, and I just chose to go with, for me, I think was the most obvious one that stuck out, and being Arya 5, A Game of Thrones. Next up, we have Sansa. Now, Sansa's a really interesting one to me, because Sansa's not one of my favorite POVs, of course, and, especially when I've been doing my reread, the one thing I've noticed about Sansa is she doesn't really have a standout chapter throughout most of the first 2 books. And even by the end of A Clash of Kings, I don't really think there's a Sansa chapter that I look at and I go, yeah, this is one of the best of the series. And when you get to A Storm of Swords, I think that Sansa has a lot of good chapters, but she also, unfortunately, she isn't the POV that we have during the Purple Wedding, even though I think that her escape from the Purple Wedding is a pretty good chapter. I think that Sansa's best chapter comes at the end of A Storm of Swords. I think Sansa 7, in which we see Lysa's death, we see the big reveal of what's been going on between Lysa and Littlefinger. I think that that's probably my favorite moment. It feels very tense as Sansa might die here. Maybe she's going to get thrown out the moon door by Lysa, and then Littlefinger, has this big reveal and kills Lysa. In my opinion, I think that's the best chapter for Sansa. It feels like it has the most character work for Sansa, especially the beginning of it when you see how Littlefinger, has taken some advances on Sansa, and how you see that she's now again in a different scenario that maybe she's not realizing, of somebody, using her as a chess piece and as a puppet, and the weird relationship that Littlefinger and Sansa have. I think you could also bring up a couple of Feast for Crows chapters as well as being Sansa's best, but to me, I went with kind of the big payoff of A Storm of Swords with Sansa 7. Moving on to Ned. So Ned only has 1 book. Of course, he dies in book 1, but I think I would personally go with Ned 13, A Game of Thrones, being his best chapter. Now, you could point to the idea that Ned 14, which is Ned's coup, is his best chapter, just given that's the big payoff that everything's been leading to, and we see that Ned is betrayed by Littlefinger, and it's been a culmination of some of the bad decisions that Ned has made, and so maybe some of the unluckiness that's gone his way. You could point to Ned 15, which is his last chapter in terms of, him thinking about his life, and also the decisions he's going to have to make, is whether he's going to say that he was wrong about Joffrey and that Joffrey was the true king and lying more or less to protect Sansa. You could look at Ned and Robert's argument about killing Daenerys. There's a lot of great chapters, but I really think that the lead up to Ned's coup is my favorite, not exactly Ned's coup, because by the time we get to the Ned's coup's chapter, in a lot of ways, everything's already been ironed out. Ned is screwed by the time that chapter happens. What I love about Ned 13 is it's the build-up into it. So you have decisions like, is Ned going to go along with Renly, take the kids in the middle of the night? He's not going to do that because Ned is not that kind of person, and he doesn't believe in using innocence against, for instance, their mother and Cersei. And you have him deciding to have Littlefinger bribe the gold cloaks, and you're seeing how that's testing what Ned is willing to do in terms of what his ethics and morals say. I love all of that in Ned 13. And so I like Ned 13 because it's still Ned having some agency, making decisions, but in a lot of ways it's him digging his own grave. So I'm a big fan of Ned 13. That might be a hot take in terms of Ned's best chapter, but let me know what you guys think in the comments. Getting into Catelyn, I've become a big Catelyn lover in terms of her chapters. I think that she has probably the best chapters in the story. The more I read the series over and over again, and the more that I, read A Dance with Dragons over and over again, I have come to probably having Catelyn as my favorite POV. And you would think that, oh, well, since she's your favorite POV, it must be pretty hard to figure out what her best chapter is or my favorite is. And it's really not. If Catelyn didn't have the Red Wedding chapter, I think it'd be up for debate because she has so many great chapters outside of that, like Renly's Peach, the King of the North chapter, even some of the lead up to the Red Wedding. But in my opinion, the Red Wedding chapter is the best chapter of the entire series. It's the best written. It's the best that George has ever done, I think, in the series, maybe even his whole writing career. I think the way that he builds that atmosphere, he gives you so much trauma in the Red Wedding and the emotional roller coaster he takes you on. And it is really the culmination of the first three books. It is, in my opinion, the climax of the first three books. And a lot of the rest of A Storm of Swords is kind of like your falling action and resolution of the first three. And so it has to be the Red Wedding for me. There's not really a lot to really I want to discuss because you guys know we've talked about the Red Wedding to death on this channel. And so let's move on. So Bran is the next one. And Bran, I think, was another hard one. There's a couple chapters for me with Bran that stand out. But, Bran's one of those characters that he's kind of similar to Sansa, in my opinion. He doesn't have a chapter that I go and say, oh, that is definitely one of the best, and that's in my top 10 of the whole series. It's not like that with Bran, but I do think that Bran is a POV that he progressively gets better. I think in terms of once Robb leaves Winterfell and it's Bran, more by himself and being an actual POV, I think he gets better each and every book. So I think that in a Game of Thrones, I think that he starts out a little slow in terms of the character development, and then Clash of Kings, I think he gets a bit better. And then A Storm of Swords, I think you start to see a lot more of his better chapters, places like, the Night Fort and hearing the story of the Night of the Laughing Tree. There's some great moments in A Storm of Swords for Bran. I would personally say, though, I think that Bran's best chapter is just his last chapter. I think Bran 3: A Dance with Dragons is the best Bran chapter that we get. I think all three of his chapters in A Dance with Dragons, you could argue, is his best, just because the tension has built up. And so for Bran, when you look at a lot of the other characters that I talk about and their payoffs being in A Storm of Swords, Bran's is really in A Dance with Dragons. This is the moment we finally have gotten to meeting the Children of the Forest and Brynden Rivers, and Bran, having possibly Jojen pace and seeing his powers more awakened. He's getting these visions of the past and seeing Ned and possibly talking about Ned and Jon and how they're going to grow up, and seeing all these different visions that I think are so awesome to speculate into. And I just find that his last chapter is the most interesting in terms of a payoff, and the most interesting to do with character of Bran and how he's going to become maybe this vessel for the old gods. So that is my pick for Bran. I would love to see what you guys think, because Bran is a highly contested character. He's not one of the favorites of the series. I'd love to hear what you guys think. What is Bran's best chapter? Getting into Daenerys, another contested character, I think this one's pretty obvious for me, even though I think that Daenerys has some very strong chapters in the series. There's a lot of good ones to pick from, whether it's her getting the Unsullied, the House of the Undying, whether it's her riding Drogon for the first time. To me, I love Daenerys in A Game of Thrones. I think it's her best book. And I think her last chapter, where she brings the dragons back into the world, I think is a top 5 chapter in the entire series. I would probably have it maybe third. I haven't looked at my chapter rankings for the big 10 of the series in a while, but I would guarantee it's probably in that top 5. I'd probably go top 3. I think the only chapters I'd have maybe above it would be the Renly's Peach chapter and the Red Wedding. So again, I think that everything that Daenerys goes through throughout book 1 is concluded perfectly in A Game of Thrones, and you see Daenerys questioning herself if she's going mad for what she's about to do, and this blood ritual seems like she's doing Mirri Maz Duur's death, the conclusion of that character, and Drogo, and he is now gone, he's being burned, and then you have this big reveal that the dragons have come back. It's what everything has been leading to in the first book for A Game of Thrones in terms of Daenerys' arc. And I just think it is a perfect chapter. So to me, Dany 10, A Game of Thrones, clear and obvious pick. Now getting into everybody's favorite, Davos. Davos is a weird one because I actually went back and forth on this one for a while. I was thinking about Davos in A Dance with Dragons. That's what I thought I was going to say for this video, but I just recently got done doing Davos to A Clash of Kings within the last, I think, 2 months maybe, and I really love Davos 2: A Clash of Kings because it's this chapter that kind of builds off of the whole Renly arc so well. We don't see Stannis from a Stannis side POV like Davos or Crescent until after we've already seen Renly's death, so we only see Stannis through Catelyn's eyes. And so when you get back after Renly's death and Stannis is trying to take Storm's End, and you see Sir Courtney Penrose is resisting, but you see Davos looking at Stannis through his eyes and how he's become, visibly aged. He feels like he's lost a part of himself, that these, shadowies are having a toll on him. And it's Davos going through the entire chapter trying to figure that out, and also getting more into the backstory of Stannis as a character. What does he believe in terms of all these lords who have flipped sides now to his side, even though they didn't originally because of Renly. And you're going through all of that, which is so fascinating. But then the whole payoff, and I think that this chapter gets overlooked so much because of, well, the show in a lot of ways changed the way the Stannis plotline goes, and so many people forget that this would have been a huge reveal. This is a huge chapter for the series, because unlike how in the show does it, where they make it very obvious Stannis is going to kill Renly, and then they show you the Shadow Baby stuff before Renly dies, the book does it the opposite way. The book kind of alludes to the idea that Renly might need to be taken out, but Stannis isn't shown to be he's going to do it. You don't see any of the Shadow Baby stuff until this chapter, when you see Davos is rowing Melisandre out, trying to get her underneath Storm's End, and you see her birth a monstrosity, a shadow, and it runs into the castle, and we find out through other POVs that Sir Courtney Penrose is dead. Fantastic chapter, in my opinion. It's one of my favorites now. It's really highly ranked in my Clash of Kings rankings, so got to give a little bit of love to Davos too. Getting into Theon. Theon has appeared in 2 books, and I think obviously Theon is a character that's way better in A Dance with Dragons, even though I think he's still really good in Clash of Kings. He's just the best POV in A Dance with Dragons, and like I said, my Dance with Dragons retrospective that I've been re-listening to and editing for the second channel, and what I always said in that video in that series was that I think Theon just gets better every chapter, and I almost feel like that is the same from A Clash of Kings all the way to his last chapter in A Dance with Dragons. He just gets better each and every one, and so when you get to the final payoff of Theon escaping Winterfell, and this really tense chapter in which he's trying to get Jane Poole out of the castle, and the Spearwives are kind of dying, getting picked off, and he has to jump out of the castle with Jane. I find that chapter to be a great payoff to coming back into the character of Theon, or Reek becoming Theon, and then also all the character work that's been done, the tension of if Theon gets caught, it's going to be worse than death. And I just find the chapter to be a great finish for Theon in A Dance with Dragons, albeit I have made other criticisms of that book. Theon is not one. Getting to Samwell Tarly. I have a love-hate relationship with Samwell Tarly. I love his chapters in A Storm of Swords. I am not a big fan of his chapters in A Feast for Crows. But I think that Samwell almost has the opposite of Theon. I think that Theon gets better as he goes on. I think Samwell gets worse as he goes on. And so Samwell in A Storm of Swords, his first chapter is literally the Fist of the First Men, more or less, and watching the Night's Watch party try and get to Craster's, basically fleeing the Fist. And it's kind of Sam recounting everything that's gone on. And then it's Sam killing a White by the end of the chapter, which is crazy for Sam. It's a great nice little mini arc through one chapter almost. Sam basically is wanting to die. He can't go on anymore. I think it's a pretty good follow-up chapter of the prologue, and it really does a great job establishing the Beyond the Wall plot line as well for Sam and for the Night's Watch as a whole. Great chapter, great way to start out A Storm of Swords for Sam. Next, we have Jaime. Now, Jaime is another POV that he has so many great chapters that you could pick any number of them. I decided to go with Jaime 5, A Storm of Swords. I feel like this is a lot of people's favorite Jaime chapter, but it's basically the bathhouse scene. So we have all the reveals about Jaime's whole past and what happened during Robert's Rebellion, why he did the things he's done. We get a lot of the conversation about ethics. And then also we get to then see his dinner sequence with Roose Bolton. So in the show, it kind of separates that. In the book, it's one continuous thing. So you have the bathhouse scene as kind of the start, and then you have what's going to happen to Jaime with Roose and then the Brienne, all that dinner sequence. All that's fantastic. It oozes with great lore about the history of A Song of Ice and Fire in terms of Robert's Rebellion. Also, Jaime as a character, it makes us maybe change how we look at the character. It's that big defining moment. And then the Roose Bolton section is almost purely just set up for the Red Wedding and making you question Roose Bolton and all of that. So great chapter for a lot of different reasons. It's one of my favorites in the series, and by far, and for me, Jaime's best. Brienne has, again, only one book that she has a POV in, but I do think it's a very strong POV, especially in the second half, and you can pick a couple chapters. I think all of her last 4 chapters could be your favorite, whether it's Brienne 5, whether it's Brienne 6, Brienne 7, Brienne 8, all of them are great. And for me, I personally decided to go with Brienne 6. I know that it's not as much the action or big payoff moments, but I think it's like the chapter that when I think of A Feast for Crows, it's the chapter I think about. The elder brother's speech to Brienne about, not becoming a pawn in war and being just another statistic of dying in war for what reason, and how, war changes people, and how he was even impacted on it. And you even see that is actually exemplified in the character of the Hound, who we believe to be the grave digger who is shown in this chapter as well. But then you also see Brienne, who is like crying because she believes that, her father deserves a better daughter, all that kind of stuff. And you see Brienne rationalize the idea that she has to try and save, Arya or Sansa because that's her duty, and she will do it or she will die trying. It's a great chapter because it has all of the themes that A Feast for Crows is known for, wrapped up all in one of the better character chapters for Brienne, and sets up the finale of that arc really well, where Brienne is going to basically almost die fighting and almost be killed by Catelyn or Lady Stoneheart, who is the person that she's doing all of this for. It seems like that great betrayal that's set up really in this chapter in Brienne 6 really well. And lastly, we have the queen herself, Cersei. Now, Cersei is in 2 books as a POV, and you might be thinking, her best chapter's obviously got to be in A Feast for Crows because that's really her book. She has the most POV chapters in it. And I think this is where A Dance with Dragons has a leg up on A Feast for Crows sometimes, is that I think, Cersei's arc concludes so well in A Dance with Dragons. The Walk of Atonement chapter is just perfectly written in terms of building up Cersei to be this character we're very sympathetic of. We hate the Faith and the Faith Militant and the High Sparrow more than we do Cersei herself, and we see her stripped down and she's being abused. People are throwing stuff at her. She's bleeding. She starts as this proud lion who she won't cry. She won't show any emotion to these people. And by the end, she's completely broken down. Her pride has been completely, it seems like, stripped from her. And she's even lost any semblance of respect that the public might have had for her beforehand. That's what Kevin even notes in the epilogue. And so I think that chapter just is so well written in terms of the way George, he puts us in Cersei's head and everything that she's seeing and hearing and feeling. And you almost, as a reader, it feels like almost a slog to read this chapter. When is it going to be over for Cersei? When is she going to get out of this? And I hate Cersei as much as the next person would have when they were reading, and being introduced into Cersei as a POV, but you can't help but feel horrible for Cersei and all that she's going through. And so that is all of the POVs I was going to talk about. I didn't talk about certain ones like Barristan. He just doesn't have enough chapters to meet my minimum, or Victarion or Asha. Any of those that just didn't have enough chapters to meet the minimum of 5 chapters. So yeah, let me know. What do you guys think? What are the best chapters for all of these different POVs? And I'll see you guys all in the next one. Bye, guys.